All right, we're learning the Chatzar Yosef. Last week we really digressed into a lot of introduction. So this week I'm going to be very minimal. We're going to go straight into the material because we want to get through this chapter of Hashem. We're learning a story in Masechet Gittin. In the book, we're on page 225. The Gemara Masechet Gittin shows up on page 57a. Let's read the story. It says in English, page 225, the story. Because of a shaft of a carriage, the city of Betar was destroyed. Betar was a very glorious Jewish city. Shortly after the destruction of the second temple, it was destroyed as well. It was customary in that city of Betar that when a boy was born, they would plant a cedar tree. And when a girl was born, they would plant a tornita tree, which Rashi explains to mean a pine tree. When they would later marry each other, a couple from that city, they would cut down these trees and make a chuppah for their wedding from their respective trees, the branches of the trees. One day, the Caesar's daughter was passing by that area, and a shaft from her carriage in which she was riding broke off. Her attendants chopped down a nearby cedar tree and brought a piece of it to her to replace the broken shaft. The Jews of Betar, when they saw this, they came and fell upon them and beat them, made a big deal about it. The Romans came and said to the Caesar, "The Jews have rebelled against you." And then the Caesar came against them in war, and a war ensued, which eventually led to the destruction of Betar. That's section 1. Please, I think this is video number 4 of this particular story that we're doing, because the first 3 we did a lot of questions, a lot of commentaries, and a lot of deep introductions to the comments to the presentation we want to give now. It's all based on the depth of the system, fundamental spiritual system that God uses to manage the world. Of course, we call them the 10 Sefirot, the 10 lights that God emanated from His infinity that eventually came down to our world and became our world. And 3 of those lights are called Chesed, Din, and Rachamim. They're the middle ones. They're number 3, 4, and 5, technically from top to bottom. Chesed, Din, Rachamim. And they work in a very specific way. They're related to right, left, male, female. Please see the previous video on this in order to fully get a full understanding, the previous 2 videos actually, on all of those concepts. We're on page 230 now. We're going forward from there to try to finally understand our Gemara. With this introduction, and with the help of the Divrei Shaul, which is one of the commentaries we saw. Yeah, what's your question?
3, 4, 5?
Yeah, because Da'at is part of Keter. Da'at is the lowest part of Keter. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What did I say? 3, 4, 5? I'm sorry, I meant 4, 5, 6. Number 4, 5, 6. Not 3, 4, 5. Chesed, Din, Rachamim is number 4, 5, 6. Chesed is the 4th one, Din is the 5th one, Tiferet is the 6th one. Thank you for that correction. So the Divrei Shaul was one of the deep commentaries the last commentary that we learned on this Gemara, how he explained the minhag of the trees that they had, why they're planting cedar trees for males, tornita trees for girls. What does it represent? So with everything that we learned in the past 4 videos, we can finally understand, past 3 videos. Let's see what it says. We're on page 230. They planted a cedar tree for a male whenever they had a baby boy, because the cedar has the capability to regenerate its stump. That's what the Divrei Shaul mentioned from the Gemara. That's one of the special traits of a cedar tree, that when you cut it, it regrows. The stump regenerates. And this represents the multi-potentiality of maleness. We explained that a male versus a female is defined by multi-potentiality, having multiple possibilities and loving to have all those choices. Right? That's a male thing. And regeneration of a tree, no matter how many times you cut it, it keeps growing back. That's sort of a male trait, that it's multi-potential. This potential always gets actualized, and no matter how many times you cut it, it can always regenerate. That's what a cedar tree is. The cedar tree also lacks the ability to produce fruit. The cedar trees don't have any fruit. Just as the male does not develop and bear fruit, in other words, children. The woman bears the fruit, which is the children. So it makes sense why they would plant a cedar tree for a male whenever they had a baby boy. The tornita tree, however, is the exact opposite, which is why they planted it for the birth of a girl. It lacks that capability to regenerate its stump, right? If you cut it, it does not regenerate. It's limited in that sense, just like a woman. Not a woman, but the female attribute is the attribute of limiting, of taking one thing out of the possibilities and taking and only focusing on that, and therefore by definition cutting off all other possibilities. That's the limiting factor of that. And that's related to the lack of the ability of this tornita tree to regenerate its stump. It's limiting. But it does produce fruit, however. It has a fruit. Taking from the realm of the infinite and actualizing it into practicality. That's what femaleness is. That's what they would plant a tornita tree for a baby girl. Their overall goal with this custom was to achieve the perfect harmony of these attributes, which permeate our lives. These attributes, right? As we explained in the last lecture, this three-step system of Chesed, Din, Rachamim is found anywhere in your life if you look hard enough. They wanted to forge the perfect fusion of them, of these two attributes, of the male and the female, the right and the left, the Chesed and the Din. Right? The right is male and Chesed. That's the cedar tree. The left is female and Din, judgment. That's the tornita tree. They took branches from here when they wanted to get married, and they made a chuppah. They intertwined them. They found the middle, so to speak, between them. And this is, as we know, Rahamim, the third attribute, third midah. They wanted to take that and infuse that into the heart of every household. That was their point, because Rahamim is the most desirable of the three midot, as we explained in the previous video. That is why they constructed the chuppah at weddings with the branches of these trees, and the groom's cedar tree. The groom's cedar tree and the bride's tornita tree. The word chuppah, by the way, chet vav pei he chuppah, a wedding canopy. It stems from the word lachpof in Hebrew, which means to overlap. To overlap, because what's happening around the chuppah? Male and female attributes are overlapping, intertwining, and creating rachamim. Creating that third attribute of rachamim. Their goal was to build families in the community in Betar, that city, that perfectly overlapped and balanced maleness and femaleness, chesed and din, manifesting by definition rachamim, the middle one, the middle attribute. The Maharal's explanation of the custom also fits well, as we learned it, since he emphasized how the custom symbolized a theme of family building. He kept saying this. It's all about building. You know, his main theme is why they did this was in order to build a family, build a fortification. Thus, Betar's custom used wood from trees, which are physical building blocks. That's what you use to build things, right? Wood. And they used that to invoke these deep concepts of the three-step system of Chesed, Din, Rachamim, which are the spiritual building blocks that build the world. As we saw in the previous verse, Tehillim famously says, Olam Chesed Yibaneh. The world is built, on Chesed. Chesed is the foundation, that the first midah that leads to the rest of the system, as we said. Their aim was to achieve rachamim in their family constructs, which would afford them the blessing of fortification, as the Maharal mentioned. The key to fortifying any construction building or project is balance. If you don't have balance in your building project, it's just going to topple over. That's the key. That's what any architect will tell you, right? They achieved this this balance physically by fortifying their city, and ideologically by striving to achieve the midah of rachamim. Perhaps it is even hinted in the name of the city, Betar, Bet Yud Taf Resh. It can be broken up into the following thing: Bet Resh, Bait Resh, which means house of Resh, and Resh is the first letter of Rachamim. Yes. Everything here is pretty much well in this chapter. That was the motto by which they lived, and also by which they died, as they were destroyed, as we'll see later on in these sections. Still, we have to ask, why did they choose specifically the tornita tree for females? There are plenty of other trees that produce fruit and don't regenerate their stumps. If those were the main attributes that we're looking at, that they wanted to take a tree that represents femaleness, that doesn't regenerate its stump, it's limited in that way, and that produces fruit. There's other trees. Why the tornita tree specifically? If we take the approach of the Maharsha, that the tornita tree is the shita, I'd say shitim, as the Torah talks about, which is translated by Art Scroll as acacia trees. I don't know, is it acacia or acacia? I'm not sure how to pronounce it. A-C-A-C-I-A. Acacia trees, I call it acacia. This is what the Maharsha said the tornita is. Then, if that's true, we can follow the following. We can offer the following answer. The Torah recounts the incident that occurred in a place called Shittim. There was a place in the Torah called Shittim. Look in Bamidbar 25:1, chapter 25, which literally means acacia trees. Shittim means acacia trees. One shita is one tree, acacia tree. Shittim is acacia trees. There's a place called Shittim, a place. There, seated by the advice of Bil'am. Look how it falls out beautifully again. Thank you, Hashem, because this week's parasha is Parashat Balak. This particular parasha that we're talking about now, this verse, this idea, Shittim, this week's parasha. Bil'am, of course, who is the Rasha, the wicked prophet of the Gentiles, who gave the evil advice to Moab to lure the Jewish men into promiscuous acts with the Moabite woman, which led to plagues and death. Right? Bil'am, the Moabite and Midianite woman, he told them to seduce the Jewish men into idolatry and immoral relations. The men giving into these sins, when a man gives into such a sin, when he has relations with a woman he's not allowed to, right? This is categorized as a chesed. Did you know that? We saw this before as well in chapter 14. We mentioned this. Yeah. No. Yes. Was it? Yeah. Yes, it's a chesed. How is it a chesed? If a man sleeps with a woman he's not allowed to be with, that's called a chesed. Which is weird, because chesed, taking out of context, because chesed usually we associate it with kindness, a good deed, a mitzvah, but by definition, the core of what chesed means, as we explained in this chapter and throughout the book, according to the deeper wisdom, chesed is a limitless giving beyond what is deserved. Giving too much, in a sense. Giving a lot. Outpouring of oneself to another. That's what chesed is. And when a person, such as a man, has relations with women he's not allowed to be with, he has given too much of himself to her.
He has relations with the woman he is allowed to be with. What do you call that?
When he's, say again, when he's with the woman he's allowed to be with, that's called the rachamim. Because that's a giving, but it's the limited amount of giving that is accepted and prescribed by the Torah. The Torah wants you to give, but to give the way the Torah tells you to give, the right amount. Giving too much is damaging in many ways. And this is one of those ways. Giving too much of oneself, of one's body, to be with another person, that's with the wrong person, that's forbidden, that's too much. That's called a chesed. Being with your wife at the right time is a mitzvah, it's rachamim, it's a perfect amount of giving. Okay. Good. So, men being with women they're not allowed to be with is called a chesed. Since it was, by the way, if you don't believe me, since you think I'm crazy, there is a verse directly in the Torah that supports this, which, look in chapter 14, section 2, the verse is Vayikra 17:20. Don't believe me? Go look over there. Vayikra 17:20, where it says, if a man is with his sister, has a relation with his sister, chesed hu. The Torah calls it a chesed. I mentioned it. For those who just saw this video, didn't see that video, they might think I'm crazy. So look over there. Okay. As mentioned, a plague broke out after this incident among the Jewish camp. Pinehas, which is next week's parasha, he took the initiative and he infiltrated the camp of Shimon, which is where most of the sins were happening, and he thrust his spear into Zimri, who was the leader of the tribe of Shimon at the time, and the Moabite princess that he was sinning with in that moment. Kozbi Batsur was her name. And he took them out and he displayed them on his spear, both their bodies on his spear, held them up like that. There was a lot of miracles that happened with that particular event. Look in the Midrash, amazing stuff. He displayed them to the camp like that. This isolated incident was surely an act of deen, meaning deen means punishment. It means judgment. Zimri was judged in that moment. He was allowed to be. There's a famous law that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to say at the time, but Pinchas remembered, which is what Kana'im Poga'im bo, which means a zealous person can lethally punish a man, Jewish man, who is in the middle of a Torah forbidden act of forbidden relations, not any act, right? Meaning only when you catch him in the exact act, at that moment he's chayav mitah, and you can administer the death penalty. And that's what Pinchas did, yeah? Everyone's benefit, because they get atoned. That's the atonement for that's the atonement they get in Shamayim for that sin. At the end of the day, everything is a chesed. That's one of the things I mentioned. At the end of the day, even a deen is a chesed. From the overall picture, when you zoom out, it's all a chesed. But in our zoomed-in world, it's hard for us to zoom out. We live day by day, minute by minute, second by second. So when you break it down, it goes chesed, then din, then rachamim. You zoom out, it's all one big chesed that God is giving us. Beautiful thing. Anyway, so at that moment, when Pinchas infiltrated and killed them, that was a din. That was a moment of judgment that he deserved, exactly that, and that's what he got, and punishment. As a result of Pinchas's actions, what happened? The plague was stopped, and the problem was solved. This was a rachamim overall for the people, for the nation.
The plague didn't stop, it's still din.
If the plague didn't stop, is it considered a din still? Well, the definition of rachamim we're saying is the stoppage of din. It's the end phase of din, and where the good actually comes out. Which means if Zimri wasn't killed at that moment, the din would have continued. The plague would have continued. And there would be no rachamim, would be pushed, delayed. You understand? Rachamim is always waiting to come. It's just whenever din ends, rachamim comes in.
How come we can't say when din ends, chesed starts? Is that also a thing?
When din ends, chesed starts. Why would you want to say that? Explain.
See, because we're defining rachamim as ending din.
Yes. But not just, that's one factor of it. It ends din.
It says balance.
Yes.
So how is balance restored here?
The peace. There was peace. There was no more death. The plague stopped, and also the chesed stopped. Which means, what was the chesed in this case, in this particular microcosm? That they were giving themselves over too much to the women. So that stopped. The plague stopped. And rachamim, tranquility.
When the plague came, the din was the plague, right?
Yes.
Did the din stop the chesed? Did the plague stop the giving over of self?
Did the plague stop the... I'm not getting your question, I understand.
Was chesed, because we in this only in this case I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Chesed is defined as the men giving over themselves.
Sure.
In this case only, din is defined as...
So that's the thing. You don't have to limit them. You don't have to limit the three to just... Because they're everywhere. On every level that you zoom in on any situation, they're there. So we're just pinpointing certain aspects of them in this particular incident. Understand? Because it's true on multiple levels. They unfold within each other endlessly. Right? The deeper you look, you can see another relationship of the three. The more you look out, from the perspective of the entire nation, you could see the three. From the perspective of just one of the people, Zimri, you could see the three. And what happened to them, right? Okay, so we want to take Zimri as an example. So he was giving himself over too much to this woman. That's a chesed that he did. Then he received din from Pinchas by getting stabbed.
So only the stabbing was the din.
Sure, for him. And then what was his rachamim? His rachamim would be that in Shemayim he got atonement. In his window, his vantage point. Then you can look at it from the nation's vantage point. Everything. From his vantage point, you could also see what was the chesed there. The chesed there, he wasn't doing the sin. So I have to do some digging exactly to see how it fits there. Okay? So now, thus, since all this happened in a place called Shittim, that's what we're going back to. All this happened in a place called Shittim, named after the acacia tree. The acacia tree itself represents the three-step system to an extent. That's the source that the people of Betar got, you might say, to take specifically a shita, an acacia tree, to use it for the girl. Letting the people of Betar reason to use it in their tradition aimed at achieving the very same system. It's just a theory. You could take it as you want. Last point I want to say here for this section. Now we may understand why the people of Betar were so outraged at the Caesar's daughter's attendance for taking one of their cedar trees. That was our question. What was the big deal? Why they had to start a war for them taking a tree? It seems that the daughter of Caesar instructed them to do so explicitly, trying to fulfill the Romans' agenda of taking the blessings of fortification away from the city, as the Maharal posited. Right, and this connects back to chapter 13 about the relationship between Yaakov and Esav. How Esav was always endlessly upset at Yaakov for stealing, quote unquote, the blessings that from their father Yitzchak. And and Rome is a descendant of Esav, and of course the Jewish people are descendants of Yaakov. So we saw in chapter 13 how one of the Roman Caesars, one of the army generals, wanted to take away the blessing of multiplicity, of ribui. And here the Maharal says that Caesar's daughter, wanted to take away the blessing of fortification away from this amazing city called Betar, fortified, glorious city called Betar. And one way to do that was the trees, because the trees was one of their physical and spiritual way of representing that bracha, as we're saying here. It seems she chose to take a cedar tree rather than a tornita tree, because the cedar tree represents maleness. The zachar, male, and zachar, male, the word zachar, has the same gematria as beracha, blessing. The male is where the potential for blessing originates. Blessing has to starts with a female, blessing always starts with a male attribute of multiple potentiality, eventually condensing down into one physical reality, and that's the female part. There's two parts, there's two phases of a bracha. One is the male, then the female. The male is, I bless that this should happen to you, I hope, I pray, right? And then that has to come down from Shemayim, from the potential outcomes in heaven that they have to send down to you. And then you do a mitzvah, and the mitzvah takes one of those potential blessings and manifests it in your life. And now it's real. Now it's not just in thought. It's not just potential, it's actual, it's kinetic, right? That's the female aspect of it. That's why mitzvah, by the way, is a female word. Because when you do mitzvot, the function of mitzvah is to sort of capture the bracha and manifest it in the real world, in your life. I didn't put that in there. Again, that's the benefit you get out of the videos, because whenever Hashem sends to my head, I throw in. Okay. Yeah, I was very shorthand here. I was trying to just get to the point of the trees. Oh look, I explained something there. Okay. So now, yeah, the male is where the potential for blessing originates, and is only later manifested into reality by the female. What is blessing after all? After all, anyway, how is blessing defined? It is a concept so commonly talked about and executed, right? We say that we make brachot, we wish for brachot. The word bracha is a daily usage word that we do and say so many times today, but we're ever thinking of what exactly is a bracha? Define a bracha. It's hard. It's hard to find the words or one or two sentences to say what a bracha is. Well, it's bracha. Okay, what's a bracha? It's hard to define the word bracha. So here we attempted a definition. It's commonly misunderstood. We say the concept of blessing means, you know what it means? It simply means more. Just more. When something is able to produce more than its physical boundaries are expected to produce. That's what bracha is. In fact, every letter in the root of the word bracha, beracha, bet, resh, chaf, he. What's the root of the word beracha? Berech, without the he. Which is, there's usually 3-letter roots, 2 or 3-letter roots. Bet, resh, chaf, chaf sofit. Every one of these letters has a gematria of some version of 2. In other words, bet is 2, chaf is 20, resh is 200. Rooted in the concept of 2. What does that mean? That means the number 2 is the first number of plurality, of more than one. As such, it is the prototypical number of more, of doubling, which in a deeper sense is tantamount to the multipotentiality of maleness. More. That's what males always want, more. What else can I do? How else can I do it? How much more can I achieve? That's a male thing, right? And just one more point on this bracha. We said bracha is when something produces more than you expected it to produce. So a person can have a $100,000 salary, and yet he has a lot of bracha in that money, which means no debt. He's able to pay for things he didn't really expect. He lives comfortably, not worried about his finances. Lifestyle is fine. Whereas you could have a person who's making $5 million a year, but there's no bracha in his money. He's worried about his money is tied up in so many different places. He has to pay so many different loans, installment loans, and mortgages and rates and all these things, and then so many projects, and then his expenses are high because his style of living is high. His standard of living, is high. So he's living basically month to month. $5 million a year. No bracha, no money. That's the point. There's one example. Bracha can be, that's an example of how it could be in a physical object, where it does much more than you expected it to do. I'll give you one example in my life. Interesting thing. Got married. Going to be 10 years. This year was at the Shem. Actually, in a month, it's going to be 10 years. And about a year in my first marriage. In my marriage. The first year of my marriage. I'm only married once. Baruch Hashem. Should stay that way. Anyway, I digress. In the first year of my marriage, we lived in a one-bedroom apartment, and we were doing shopping a lot, right? Just first time in your life you're doing shopping so often. Up to that point, it was your parents doing everything. So I had to buy a cart. One of those old Kalyaski, those old foldable carts. I went to the liquidators. Remember the liquidators next to Aaron's? When it was still liquidated. Now it's empty. I went over there, and I bought this one cart, a nice cart, a big one, big size. It was red, and I got the largest size they had. The regular price was $30. This one was a little flimsy. It was missing a screw, so the wheel would detach, and you had to push it and drive it in a particular way. It's been used and abused, so I bargained with the Chinese guy over there. He tells me $30. I said, listen, come on, this thing is barely. I got him down to $15. I bought that cart that barely was moving properly for $15. That cart had so much bracha in it because I used it until last year. My wife threw it out. I said, why are you throwing this out? I love this cart. We used that cart for shopping for years. I used that cart to move twice. Put a bunch of stuff in it from one apartment to the house, moving back and forth. Not one trip, several trips, up and down the stairs. It's barely holding on. It's flimsy. Do you understand? There's holes in the bottom. The wheel detaches. If you walk straight with it and there's a bump, the whole thing will fall over. It lasted for almost 10 years, and then my wife threw it out. I was so upset. I love that cart. But that's an example of how you can have bracha in a little unexpected thing. It does so much for you. That's bracha. One version of bracha. Anyway, I digress. So back over here, berachot are linked with males. Why? Because males are multi-potential. That's their idea. More and more and more. And the root of beracha, every letter is a 2. And 2 represents that idea of moreness. More. Moreness is a word? No. Just more. Okay. When we request blessing from Hashem, we are asking for the release of limitation, for the opening of the gates so that the blessings can flow down. Right? We're asking for that male quality. God, please give us more than we expected. We are asking for the removal of the barriers and limits so He can deal with us in a fashion that accords with rachamim and not din. It is no coincidence that one of the few terms the Talmud uses for prayer, by the way, is leba'era hameh, which means literally to request rachamim. When we're asking for beracha, we're requesting rachamim, which means we're requesting for the giving, for the more. Rachamim, we said, is the perfect amount of giving.
Yeah, we're requesting for the right amount of what we need.
Yes.
Because we don't want abundant, like too much or something.
Right, because then we're going to ruin it. If we get too much, we're going to ruin it, right? Yeah. Some people want too much. But that's not in the definition of bracha. That's a chesed. If you're asking Hashem for chesed, then you're asking for more what you need, what you deserve. If you're asking for Hashem for bracha, you're asking Him for exactly what you need at the right time as you deserve it. Yeah. That's what it is. Okay, so we're going to end there. Next week, section 2. We're going further, and section 2 is actually very, very deep. It's a short Gemara, but something got into me, and I just started writing on this particular section. Hashem shall help us through. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen. Amen.